Acquitted! It has been found that Karen Reed did not murder her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe. Lawyer up. We're back with Boston criminal defense attorney Elyse Hershon to discuss the outcome. We hope you caught about 2 months ago. We put out a video discussing the case, and Elyse was kind enough to come on with us tonight. This is a different sort of podcast episode. It's not in our numbered series. Lawyer Stories here has released over 200 episodes. Find us on Instagram at lawyer_stories. Elyse, welcome back.
Yay. Thanks for having me.
And congratulations, you were quoted in the Boston Globe. That was really cool. You sent that along. You've been doing some big things down in Boston, at least a Boston criminal defense attorney, as I stated. So let's go back. You know, we were talking about the case, and I just kind of want to set the stage a little before we get into it. So Karen Reed's second trial concluded on June 18th, 2025, with a dramatic outcome, and the jury had spoken. After a 6-day verdict and approximately 21 to 22 hours of deliberation, Karen Reed was acquitted of second-degree murder, manslaughter, and leaving the scene of a fatal accident, but she was convicted of an OUI. So, Elyse, we turn to you, where there may have been changes between the first case and how it was presented and that sort of thing. Do you want to talk? I'll just open the floor if you want to talk about that, like how the first case was, and then, or the first trial, and then how it was presented and defended the second time around. And the
Sure.
jury, let's just note that the jury, the first case was a mistrial and it was a hung jury.
Mhm. That's right. So we left off, you and I talking when the trial was just beginning. And I think at the very end of that podcast, we were saying there's two competing stories. And we'll see which one was true, right? We'll see which one is proven or not proven. And since then, and the two competing stories are, did Karen Reed hit and kill her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe, and then flee the scene? Did she murder him? Or is she innocent? And was there potentially, did he die in the Alberts house? Did he get in a fight and there was a dog involved and dumped in the snow?
Unbelievable.
Those theories now has been debunked. It's they couldn't prove it. They couldn't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. I'd say there's probably not much evidence at all that there was any collision. So Karen Reed is innocent. The district attorney, Michael Morrissey, said today, the jury has spoken. Karen Reed is innocent.
The jury has spoken. That's right. What do you think was the major difference between like the presentation of evidence? I mean, I know that there was a new prosecutor that was there, which I'm going to talk about later, but how do you, I guess one question for me is like you put on this trial back in, was it 2022, you put on this trial, and then 3 years later you have all this evidence and like testimonial evidence, you have circumstantial evidence, maybe you have direct evidence. Those are a few different types of evidence. How do you preserve all that and like put on the show and the case again? Like, how do you do that? And like what changed?
Right. So the case originated 3 years ago, January 2022. The first trial was last year, 2024, over the summer. And here we are in 2025. So how do we preserve evidence? How do witnesses remember what happened? This is an interesting case. So essentially what everyone that testified at the last trial, most of them testified at the grand jury. So they now have two different instances in writing under oath testimony. So those witnesses get to review everything they said back in 2024, that trial, as well as what they testified in the grand jury, which is a secret proceeding that only the prosecutor goes to when they call in witnesses and they testify. It's a closed proceeding. So back in 2022. So right after the incident, all of the witnesses, or a lot of the witnesses, testified when their memory was fresh. And if they were EMTs, they're police officers, they wrote everything down in those police reports.
Okay.
And that became a huge factor in this trial because there were a lot of changes in testimony, a lot of inconsistent statements, and a lot of blatant lies, really,
Yeah.
under oath. And they were able to use that, literally take a piece of paper and say, but you said this under oath back then. You're saying something different now. Were you lying then or were you lying now?
Wow.
Can't be true. In terms of
Crazy. So that
other,
was
oh,
that
sorry,
was
go
like
ahead.
almost used as like a deposition or something, the first trial. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. So in terms of the other types of evidence, right? So fingerprint DNA evidence, that's tested, those are put in reports, and those are preserved and kept and used in this case. In terms of what happens with that evidence, that's what the battle of the experts is. And that was a huge,
Yeah.
I would say, upgrade in this trial. They had a very experienced and expensive accident reconstruction expert from
Right.
ARCA. The defense did. They didn't have that
From
last year
where? I'm sorry.
from ARCA. So they're an
Arca.
institute that
Yep.
specializes in
Okay.
accident reconstruction, specializing in that.
Yeah.
And they determined that there was no collision. There was no collision at all. So
Right.
that's based off of photos from the crime scene that were taken back in January 2022, measurements, and they used everything that was written down, photographed, videoed back in 2022 in addition to testimony. And they basically reconstructed the scene and did their own testing and then testified to that. So it's
Okay.
the interpretation of the evidence and data that became really important in this last trial.
Wow. So tell us about the role of a criminal defense attorney. Like what the job of a criminal defense attorney to sort of obfuscate and poke holes in the prosecution. Like if you're handling this case, I mean, I feel like there are some things that you can, you can obviously you can argue and try to make it seem inaccurate. Like tell us a little bit about that, like the job of the criminal defense attorney and what they did the second time around.
Okay, so they expanded the legal team this time.
Yep.
They brought in Robert Alessi, who's a very, very well-known attorney, slightly different vibe, right, than the big Alan Jackson personality and David Yannetti, who is a very serious Boston-based lawyer. And essentially, you can say, is the defense poking holes in the prosecution's theory, or are they finding the truth?
Right.
And in this case, I think they actually were looking for the truth.
Wow.
And what the prosecution was saying was the truth was not based on any, like you said, direct evidence. So nobody, for example, saw Karen hit John O'Keefe that night. No one
Right.
saw it, not on video. That's direct evidence. You know, circumstantial evidence is, the broken taillight and the pieces of the taillight that's at the scene. Could you draw a reasonable inference that there was an accident? Yes. And there was some DNA of John O'Keefe's DNA on that taillight. So that would be a little bit more circumstantial plus direct evidence. But the defense team really had an alternate theory. And sometimes you're just trying to say, look, the prosecution didn't prove this. But in this case, it's unique because they were saying not only did the prosecution not prove this, but there is a third party culprit, which means there's an alternate theory, which means this is what actually happened. So they had a theory, they supported it with their experts, that there was no collision and that those injuries were from, a dog bite and a fight with blunt force trauma. We can get into that in more detail. So I
Yeah.
think it's more a justice and a truth seeking mission. And it's not always like that with defense attorneys.
Okay, so it is that you think they were going for the truth. I guess you probably have to. I mean, yeah, that would be okay. That's super interesting. So
And I'll just add, and
yeah,
sometimes the defense is it wasn't him or her, it was somebody else. Or sometimes it's, well, this person did kill this person, but it wasn't intentional. It was an accident. Sometimes there's different types of theories, right? So in here, there's evidence that Karen dropped him off, right? And there's evidence that she then left. But like we said last time, what happened in those 4 or 5 hours, right? There's two very different theories
yeah.
here.
I mean, they had that whole car guy come in and like try to take the car back and hit a dummy to see like what would the damage be, that sort of thing.
Right, right. Well, what's interesting is that the defense expert, the ARCA witness, who is the accident reconstructionist, he testified that there was no collision. There was no evidence, no direct evidence that there was any collision with Karen's SUV and John O'Keefe.
Right.
And they don't have to put up an alternate theory, right? They can just say it wasn't what the prosecution is saying. But
Right.
what they actually did is put up their own medical expert, forensic expert, and the dog bite expert, right? To say, well, the prosecution isn't saying anything about a dog bite.
Okay.
The defense doesn't have to prove an alternate theory or even present an alternate theory. But they went that extra step and said, not only did she not do it, but we have an explanation as to what happened. And they
Okay.
had an expert testify that said, yeah, those scratches on his arm, that wasn't from a car, that's from a dog.
Wow. That's crazy.
That's
Yeah.
highly unusual in a criminal case.
Yeah. Um, what about the utterance, the excited utterance at this time of the scene? Like they also disputed that. Like they came back after the first go round of the first trial and said like that she actually didn't hear her say like, "Oh, I hit her," that sort of thing, or "I hit him." Sorry.
Right. So one of the EMTs that was there, Nicole, I forget her last name. So she testified that she heard Karen say, I hit him at the scene, right? But the defense really cross-examined her because this first responder wrote a report
Hmm.
at or right after the time of the incident back in January 2022, right? 23rd, 24th. So that report was written by this first responder right at the time. And then 3.5 years later, she's testifying, oh, Karen said I hit him. But that statement was never in the report she wrote. She never wrote in the report that Karen stated anything. And the defense really came after her and was like, well, this is an important statement.
Right.
That's something that you would normally write down. You're trained to write down all the important things in your report. You're trained on this. You didn't write down a statement that you're trying to say that was a confession. That seems a little bit important. So that goes to the credibility a little bit. There was no recording of her saying I hit him, right? So
Right.
it was people's interpretation of how she said it.
Mm.
Was it shock? Was it a question? Was it a confession? The jury was not persuaded by that clearly. They acquitted her both of murder and manslaughter. So whether she hit him by accident or whether she intended to hit him, the jury said, we don't believe any of those theories. They didn't prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. So they were not persuaded by that. And it is clear through a lot of the people that were there that Karen Reed was hysterical, crying, screaming, not making much sense. Probably what you'd expect when you discover a loved one is dead.
Sure. Wow. Yeah.
It's like that. I think the other thing that we didn't get to last time that I wanted to touch on also was the Google search.
Right.
The House Long to Die in the Cold, HOS, that Jennifer McCabe wrote in her phone. They testified about that at the last trial, and essentially what they did was they meaning the McCabe's, the Alberts, and Brian Higgins, all the people that were at the party that night,
Mm-hmm.
they all wiped their phones clean, right? But when
It's crazy.
forensic and not only that, but Brian Higgins and Brian Albert Sr. actually took their phone, broke it apart, took the SIM card out. Brian Higgins drove to a dumpster and dumped the pieces in different places.
Yeah. Like, what are you saying so bad where you got to do that? Right. Like,
And then he testifies and says, "Oh, I was going to get a new phone anyway."
like, what time did he go and did that? Ah, I just thought I'd crack it open at 2 in the morning on
Right.
a night we're partying.
Like, aren't you going to the Apple store and saying, "Hey, I want a new phone"? You're going to
Yeah.
drive to a dumpster, an
Yeah.
hour away and drop it off. It's crazy to think
That's awesome.
that was totally innocent, right? That
Yep.
was very suspicious. But one of the Google searches that they were able to pull from Jennifer McCabe's phone, despite her wiping her search history, was House Long to Die in the Cold. And Jennifer McCabe has said at the last trial, at this trial, and she has stood firm that Karen told her to Google that, and it was after the body was found around 6 a.m.
Wow. Okay.
The problem is the defense expert, so they're forensic cell phone expert. All they do is analyze cell phone data, and they have all these qualifications. They got on the stand and they said, that time is wrong. The Google search was actually at 2:27 a.m. And that was after Karen dropped him off and before the body was found. Well, how would Jennifer McCabe know that he was dead unless she was somehow involved, or somebody in
Right.
that house.
So within that time, she did the Google search.
Right. But the prosecution was saying, no, the time is wrong. It was after the body was found. That was really interesting. And to piggyback off that, so there was a witness, a friend of John O'Keefe, Carrie Roberts. In this trial, she actually admitted that she lied in her prior testimony. In her prior testimony, she said that she heard Karen tell Jen McCabe to Google how long it takes a body to die in the cold. She testified in the grand jury under oath. She testified at the last trial. You know what happened at this trial? She testified and she actually said, I didn't hear Karen tell Jen that. Jen McCabe actually is the one that told me that. And when I testified, Jen McCabe is the one that influenced my testimony.
Okay.
So
Yeah, that's
you have some orchestration here, right?
right.
With Jennifer McCabe, who again, sister-in-law to the Alberts on 34 Fairview, where this all happened.
Wow. Yeah, that's an interesting piece there. With the like, what did they do? Did they all kind of get together? When were the cell phones thrown out? Was it like that night? Was it the next day? Was it like a week later? I don't even know.
I'm not sure, but the interesting thing, and this is the huge failure in the police investigation, right? There's no question that this police investigation was compromised from the start,
Yeah,
whether
that's right.
it's intentionally a concerted cover up or it was sloppy. I mean, it's a little too coordinated to be sloppy, but no one went in the house and talked to the Alberts. No one in the Alberts house came out to this big scene with police and EMTs and investigators and Mass State Police and ambulances, right?
Right.
Very strange.
Very strange.
And nobody took their phones that day, right? Nobody was like, okay, let me take your phones. We're going to dump your phones. A lot of this didn't come to light till the FBI got involved down the road. And that's how all these Michael Proctor, the lead investigator, text messages came to light. That's not part of a normal.
It's crazy. How does this all it's just so much, all of this. Like all of it's like kind of mind blowing. You know what I mean? It's really it'll probably end up being a movie on like Lifetime or something, right? Or like one of the crime TVs. And to go back, like just some people have asked, to move away from the evidence for a minute. Some people have asked like why this wasn't considered under the law, like double jeopardy, if like there was going into like a second case. Why did Reed's team fail to get the charges dropped? Like, and why there's no double jeopardy here? Is that something you can explain?
Yes. So when a trial ends in a mistrial, there is no jeopardy. The
Right.
jeopardy that normally attaches when a jury is chosen and sworn in doesn't attach.
Okay.
As opposed to if it's a not guilty, right? It has to be a jury with a unanimous verdict. Jeopardy attaches. So Karen Reed now, with this verdict of not guilty, can't be tried again. But when there's a mistrial, there's really no limit to how many times they can try this case. So if there was another hung jury and another mistrial, they could have tried this again and again and again and again.
Yeah.
And the jury speaks.
Right. Okay. So jeopardy did not attach because of the mistrial. So one thing that I thought interesting when I was doing my research was that there was the new lead prosecutor.
Hank Brennan.
What's that?
Hank Brennan. Yes.
Right. So you had a new lead prosecutor. We already kind of touched on like there were more attorneys involved, but entering appearance for the defense was Victoria George.
Juror.
What's that? A juror. Like, how is that even like possible? Like, you're an alternate juror that didn't deliberate, and now all of a sudden you're like, hey, I want to be on the defense. I mean, I guess that's okay because she didn't deliberate. She wasn't in the room or whatever, but how does that happen?
It's highly unusual. I've never heard of it happening before,
Yeah.
but I say that she is a lawyer and she's a lawyer in Massachusetts. So she didn't need permission of the court to enter an appearance because she's a Massachusetts lawyer. So she entered an appearance. Is it a traditional person to enter a legal team? Absolutely not. I think people are looking around being like, how is this not prohibited? but it's not. There's very strict rules about deliberating jurors and having contact with the defense team, and we're not allowed to reach out to them. Even after the trial, there's very strict limitations. But it was a pretty genius move on behalf of the
So
defense.
you think the defense reached out to her and asked her to Miss George and asked her to be on the team? Like, do you think like maybe like okay, let me ask you this. When there's like an alternate juror, is she in the room like with
Yeah.
regular not in the deliberation room, but maybe she was there the day that the jury was selected? Do you think that there was any recognition between the jurors and Miss George?
So she was a juror in the 2024 trial, and this jury was a completely different jury pool and completely different
Okay.
jury.
Okay.
So she came in
Yeah, that makes yes. Okay.
2025 trial.
Yeah.
So, and I'll add to that jurors, it's very important that jurors are not captured on camera. Um, if you notice when you watch the trial, they don't film the jury. There's very strict rules against that to protect the anonymity and the sanctity of the jury. So even this jury and until it came out that that's who she was, she wouldn't have had that recognition, because they try to keep the jury anonymous even though they're sitting in the room and everyone in the room sees them. They're not all over the news, and that's to protect them from people trying to contact them, and trying to influence them or one way or the other while the trial is going on.
So did the prosecution say no way? Like, there's no way this lady is going to be like part of the defense team. I mean, or is it really not prejudice in any way? Like, I mean, how could like what's the real argument? Like, it's almost like this lady didn't get a chance to deliberate, so she was so interested in the case that she wanted to join the defense team. I mean, I don't know who approached who, but
Right. I don't either.
it's just kind of an interesting twist. It's like I think there's some sort of
Right.
psychological thing to it, right? Like that we're just that I'm missing. That like maybe I don't know, maybe they had seen her or maybe she was in like the original, not in the jury pool for 2024, but maybe she was just there. I don't know. It just seems like a psychological, like maybe even though she didn't, there was no contact, they didn't know who she was, like she was kept away from the press. Maybe just the prosecution knowing that the defense had this new attorney who was like an alternate juror. Maybe that messed with their heads or something a little bit. I don't know.
Right.
But
Absolutely.
it just seems like any advantage, any little advantage you can get, like they would do. It's very. I think there's some sort of tactic to it.
Absolutely. And
And
beefed up
and
on.
another part of the evidence too that came out was, and I don't know why this would happen in like the second trial, but Karen Reed's dad was a big part of it. So he wanted to come in and discuss like various admissions made by the defense to him. He wanted to he wanted to present testimony. And I get apparently he was more active in this case than, I mean, in this trial than the first one. Is that something that you followed at all?
Well, he wouldn't be able to sort of repeat anything that anyone said to him unless it was Karen's statement because it would be hearsay. Are you talking about in the trial or are you talking about more with the media?
No, I think he wanted to present testimony. Um, yeah, so I don't know why. I have down here defense, but I think he wanted to go in there and present testimony, and he was really like by your side with everything. So I don't know. What's your take on the dad? Let's just ask that.
I think her dad is her ride or die. He was there, I think, every day of the trial. They're very close from what I understand. And he supported her the whole way. And I
Yeah.
don't, you know, the prosecution may have wanted him to come in and under a subpoena, right, to compel him to testify and say that she maybe made these admissions, because she saw
Right.
him the night that all of this happened, and any sort of statement that she made because she's the defendant would be admissible through another person. Whereas if you made a statement to him or I made a statement to him, that couldn't be repeated because it's hearsay, unless there's certain exceptions. But
A
generally,
hearsay is an out-of-court statement offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted. Thank you very much.
right.
Yeah.
Yay, evidence.
Yeah.
Those
All right.
favorite.
Okay. Sorry. Go ahead, Elise. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Yeah, no. So it was likely that the prosecution wanted him to, not testify against her, but essentially that's what it would be, to come in and tell the truth and tell us everything that Karen told you that night. And that would unfortunately be admissible if she had said something, but that didn't really come to fruition.
So, right. So, and another thing that happened was, and I'm just jumping ahead to Elise.
Yeah,
So, the federal investigation was declared no longer active.
right.
So there's no longer a federal investigation. There was also a trooper Proctor. He, I guess, released some sensitive info, but he just left, or he got fired, or no, he might have resigned. I don't want to say the wrong thing here.
Oh, got fired.
He got fired. Okay, so do you know anything about the trooper Proctor?
Yeah. So essentially there were a slew of inappropriate, I guess is an understatement, text messages mostly on his personal cell phone that came to light once the FBI got involved, because any police officer's private cell phone is not subject to discovery by defense, meaning they don't turn that over. They don't even turn over, their
Right.
phone or their work phone. So this was highly unusual in this case, and the FBI got involved essentially because the investigation was very shady. And as a result, they got his cell phone, and he not only had a lot of text messages that were disparaging and sexist and inappropriate, talking about Karen Reed to his buddies, but also that a lot of the text messages were about, making sure that the evidence points to her. I mean, that is a compromised investigation. He's the lead investigator. So he's Mass State Police. He comes in, he leads the local investigation, the state police, the detectives, everything goes through him. So if we're talking about a trickle down effect, the lead investigator in this is essentially trying to find evidence and only look at evidence at the crime scene, right? That points to Karen. Wouldn't you think that's a little biased? And that is a complete muck up of the investigation.
Right. By the way, like state police, do they call them stadies still? Is that a thing? They call them stadies, right?
I don't call them stadies, but
Oh, okay. So it might have been like a UMass thing. I don't know. Just like the Packy store, going to the liquor store, the Packy store. But, all right, I'm
yeah.
sorry. Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off
Most
with that nonsense.
He testified at the last trial. He was still technically employed
Yeah.
by Mass State Police, but this trial, he was fired before this trial. So he was on leave, and then they ended up firing him. So he was completely disgraced, and he was on the witness list. And you really put someone on the witness list just to notify the court and the other party, like to cover yourself and say, okay, I might call this person, because you can't really bring in a surprise witness. But a lot of people are on the witness list and not necessarily called. He didn't testify in this trial.
Right.
Defense would have had a field day with him. He probably would have taken the fifth. If he were smart, he would have lawyered up and taken the fifth and not testified, because he would have incriminated himself on a whole lot of different things.
Right.
Oh, the FBI did close its investigation before this trial, and I think the prosecution tried to use that to say, hey, look, they were closed and they didn't, conclude any findings that were against the investigation. But the fact that they were involved in the first place is wildly unusual. The FBI doesn't get involved in murders, right? And especially state murders, even if it's a police officer. They don't get
Wouldn't
involved.
that go? That would go again. That's kind of like an opposite thing to what the prosecution was saying. Like the jury should be looking at that. Like, why the hell are the feds involved?
In the
That's
first place.
yeah. In the
Right.
first
They're
place.
trying to focus on, but they didn't find anything. But it's like, well, there was something shady enough for them to be
Yeah.
involved in the
Super
first.
shady. Super weird. It's like it's very weird. Let's shift gears. I want to go back to that if you have time, but like let's shift gears to like the impact and of the media. Like we all know, like when there's a big case like this, it gets to the media. This was like a huge case in Massachusetts and Boston. I don't normally do talk about cases on lawyer stories. Maybe we'll do it a little more. There's a couple more that seem interesting, but this has definitely been in the court of public opinion. It's everywhere. And so you were in the Boston Globe. You were quoted. Congratulations. Can I read it? Elyse Hershon, a Boston-based defense attorney, said the intense media coverage and public outcries surrounding the cause played a major role in its outcome. Proctor's misconduct, which we were just talking about, would not otherwise have come to light, and public support can raise the morale of a defense team. She said, there's no one in the state of Massachusetts who didn't hear about this case. True. That I added the true. The court, the court of public opinion has a lot of power.
Right.
Totally. So tell us a little bit about like what it's been like to be a criminal defense attorney, like in Massachusetts with this media circus, with this case.
So the media, so as a defense attorney, we constantly feel like we're the underdog. There's one or two, or at most like three of us on a legal team, usually one or two,
Yep.
against the government, the local police, the state lab, the experts, like all this huge, huge budget, the state budget, and all the team of state people, right? The government.
Yep.
We feel like we're the underdog. It's like David and Goliath. With this case, though, the media turned Karen from the underdog into almost like if you don't exonerate her, that's not justice.
Yeah.
And that is a total reversal of how we usually are viewed as defense attorneys and how defendants are viewed. So the support for Karen Read, I think, way outnumbered the people that were against her. Of course, there's always, two sides and people that were diehard, she's innocent, justice for Karen.
Right.
And then there were people that were like, no, she definitely did it and she should go down.
Which side was more overwhelming, would you say?
Definitely the justice for Karen side.
For Karen, yeah.
They had a theme color. They picked the color pink, which is kind of ironic because Karen had even come out and said, I don't wear pink and I don't really like the color pink.
Crazy.
Love what you guys are doing.
I think like, and I think on the, like, on its face, when you hear a police cover up, that sounds like some sort of movie type of stuff, like you don't really think about it until you actually take a dive into the case and you're like, wow, like this could have actually really been that.
And
because you have to put a lot of pieces together. It takes a lot of work. I mean, even just like reading basic about the case, it really is not, anywhere near what it takes to present a case like this with putting all the pieces together.
And think about, this was a multi-million-dollar defense too. So don't think
that's right. $5 million. Karen mortgaged her house. She raised money, and
the public, right?
Yeah,
the GoFundMe. So
and the GoFundMe and she raised money. She dropped like $5 million on her legal fees. I
think there was a particular company that did the GoFundMe. It was close to $1 million. That's huge.
Yeah.
That's bringing in Robert Alessi as another lawyer. That's bringing in the ARCA expert, the accident reconstruction expert. So they really leveled up in this trial, and that cost, right? But people are not going to fund something that they don't believe in, and that's not media attention and social media, and that people don't, feel strongly about. People don't come out and show up at every murder trial and raise money for the defense.
Right.
It's not a thing. So the media really took this. I think part of it was because it was a police officer that died, but it was also police officers that were witnesses and potential suspects, right? And I think are suspects. So that helped with it. And also when Karen first brought in David Yannetti and then Alan Jackson, the LA lawyer, who had represented Kevin Spacey in his Nantucket trial, he brings media with him. I mean, the media fought Alan Jackson.
Right.
That also, it took this sort of local hometown Massachusetts case and brought it national.
Right. Oh, this was on Fox and everything. Like I checked that
I
CNN,
mean, global, I
every
think.
global. Like I checked the news outlets once the verdict came out, or not the verdict, but the jury, the decision and all that. And it was there. It was like one of the top things. I mean, really, who would have thought? So you got. I mean, what's so interesting to this, and I know it's so obvious, but like there are people who were there who could actually tell you what happened. You know what I
Oh, yeah.
mean? After 4 years, somebody can just crack and tell you what actually happened. I mean, was it John O'Keefe is gone, right? Was he struck by an SUV, which
Oh,
obviously they didn't think that happened? No, right? Sorry. So we take
now
that
say
away. What's
no.
that?
We can now say no.
Okay,
Last
so
time
they've
I
done a lot of
thought,
work on that, but I'm just giving you the dog attacked, dog attack or assaulted by a police officer. I mean, there's so many.
both.
Yeah, there's so many things that like could lead to what happened that night. And then just a total cover up by the police. Like, where do you think this leaves? I would have to say the police officers generally have it tough, I think, like with like societal perspective on them in a lot of different groups. And it's unfortunate because, I do think we need good police officers, but how do you think this like affects society and like getting this decision and thinking like they all they're chucking their phones away, they had a dog, they painted or moved it from the house, they sold the house. I mean, like, how does this paint police now in a negative light, rather?
So, it's a great question. I think it brings concerns on both sides. So, one concern is that um, if this is happening in this case, if this investigation, if this had gone under the radar without all this media attention, without this big defense team, without Proctor's cell phone, personal cell phone, and those texts coming out, those salacious texts about, talking about Karen and finding evidence against her. If that didn't happen, would any of this have come out? And what other cases is this happening in that
Right.
we don't know about? Because I don't want to say nobody cares, but the public doesn't care, right? That's why I was saying my quote, the court of public opinion is so important. And on the other hand, this doesn't mean that every investigation is botched. It doesn't mean that every police officer is, either sloppy or dirty or it doesn't mean that either. I think we have to be very careful with, extreme unilateral statements either way. What
Right.
I think is
Yes.
what I think is the lesson here is that you should take everything with a grain of salt. And as an attorney, right? We're both attorneys. We question everything. And I think that's because maybe things aren't always as they appear. And we don't just take one version of events or one photo or, one of anything as the truth. We want to either corroborate it or check it against something or balance it against something. And I
Hmm.
think the lesson here is the public learned that that is something that they should be doing too, right? As jurors, as the media, as the public, everyone's historically, right? Very quick to say, oh, they were arrested, they're guilty, or oh, they
Right.
were accused, that means they did it, there's got to be evidence. But
Right.
look what can happen. So I think, this was a bad investigator. Proctor clearly did a disservice to police officers everywhere. And the police officers in the house, I think were also complicit. And, they use their experience on the job to try to pin this on Karen. I really think that's what happened. Why else would they have wiped their phones? Several of them dumped their phones in a very suspicious way. Why would they never have come out of the house that night? Never talked to police, and the crime scene and police never went in the house to see if there was a fight in there, right?
What do you think? What do you think happened?
I think that so legally, I don't think we're ever going to know what happened. We know it didn't happen.
Hmm.
So what else could have happened? John O'Keefe went in that house. There was some physical fight that happened. Do I think the fight, where John O'Keefe walked in and they were like, "We're going to kill this guy"? No, not saying that. But there was a physical fight going on, right? Maybe it was because of Karen Reed and Brian Higgins texting back and forth and flirting. Maybe because there was just some discord between John O'Keefe and that Canton crew. Whatever it was, and there's a lot of drinking involved, right? And tensions can become high and things can really escalate. As a result of that fight, he ended up dying in the snow. Did he die in the house or did he die in the snow? We don't know that either. But those injuries on his arm, there was a dog bite expert that came in and said, all my years of experience and a veterinarian and all this stuff, those scrape marks, that's not from a car, that's from a dog.
Wow. Yeah.
The dog did it, like the dog ate my homework, not
Yeah.
necessarily, but the dogs are protective of their owners. So if there was anything physical going on, that dog, it's a German Shepherd, right? Which has a little bit more vigor to it than, maybe a poodle or,
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
protective of the owner, jumped into whatever was going on between them and left evidence, right? That's evidence on John O'Keefe's arm. There was also probably evidence in that dog's mouth. Well, the dog was given away before anybody could go and take DNA samples of the dog.
Wow.
They
Yeah.
didn't do it that night. If John O'Keefe's
Right.
DNA was in the dog's mouth, that means
So
something happened.
there wasn't a proper investigation that night. So
Right.
that
They never went in the house. It's so wild to me. All of this could have been laid to rest if they had excluded the theory or the possibility that anyone in that house had anything to do with it. All they had to do was go in the house, use their eyes, right? No evidence of a fight. Great. Maybe do some forensics. See if there's any blood, if there's any holes in the wall, a lamp knocked over, anything, right?
Right.
Swab the couch, swab the rug. They rehabbed that entire room, the entire basement, I think it was. They got rid of the rug and they repainted the walls. What was on there?
Wow.
No?
Yeah, it's crazy.
They could have exonerated everyone in that house by going in and doing a proper investigation. They didn't, and the question is why. The only answer is a very suspicious one.
So what do we have for civil implications moving forward, like wrongful death, the O'Keefe's family?
We have, yeah, sorry.
What do you think about that?
So the O'Keefe family has already filed a wrongful death suit against Karen. So that's going to involve depositions, and they can compel her to testify, so to speak.
And let's talk about the standard that you have to reach versus criminal and civil. It's different. So
it's lower. It's not beyond a reasonable doubt. You and I remember O.J. Simpson, right?
Yeah.
So he was acquitted at his trial,
Mhm.
and then he was convicted at the civil trial, which doesn't involve jail time, right? Civil means money, reparation.
So preponderance of the evidence, basically.
Right. And the penalty is money, whereas criminal, the penalty is.
I mean, she's pretty judgment proof. I would probably at this point I would say. I mean, I don't know, like who else they try to sue. I mean, they could probably
And
the police department, but the city, never know.
Family, I think, it's awful. They want some closure.
Yeah.
And it's very sad that they still don't have closure.
Mhm.
And whoever is the person that did this has not come forward and is probably never going to.
Yep.
And they may never know what happened to their son and that, or brother, uncle, whatever relation it is. And it's terrible and it's sad.
Yeah, it's terrible.
And they're going to try to get some closure by suing her civilly and not going to bring him back. And I don't see them succeeding, but it is a much lower standard of proof.
Yeah. So what have we left out that you want to discuss, Elyse?
I think we actually hit the majority of things this time. I think we have our answer, right? As Michael Morrissey said, that the jury is spoken. Maybe the only other thing I wanted to point out was, the prosecution, I think, was a little bit ego driven with this and charged her with second-degree murder in a second grand jury, right? They charged her with manslaughter, vehicular manslaughter, leaving the case. And then they went to a grand jury 7 months later and indicted her and charged her with murder too. I think that was an overreach.
Yeah.
The prosecution has complete discretion in what to charge somebody with and what to do. And I think that, Hank Brennan, who is the prosecutor in this case, but they brought him from the defense side. He, former prosecutor back in the day, but he's been a defense attorney. He was on the Whitey Bulger case, very renowned Boston lawyer. he was handed a case that was botched from the beginning and charges of murder that should never have been charged. So
Right.
if he charged her with leaving the scene, some sort of vehicular manslaughter without the murder, would this have been this sensationalized? Would this have been, so outrageous? It's hard to know, but it is very dangerous, the amount of power that the prosecution has. I think that there was no evidence in that whole trial that she had any intent or malice to hit him, right? It was clearly either did she hit him and leave accidentally and while drunk, or did she not? So I think that complicated things, it muddied the water, and it really just gave people more of a reason to say, this is crazy, this is unbridled authority, this is, government power, and we need to speak out and stop this. So I think Hank Brennan did the best he could, but I think the case was doomed by the time he got to it because of the investigation and how bad it was.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was pretty bad at the beginning. But Elyse Hershon, Boston criminal defense attorney, she's going places.
Well, thank you for having me back.
Doing a great job. Hopefully
I love talking about murder.
we'll do another one. We'll find some other something else that's going on, and maybe we can do another special episode here at Lawyer Stories. Thanks for coming on. Stay right there, Elyse. Everybody else, we hope you enjoyed our little special episode. Thanks for tuning in. Check us out at Lawyer Stories, at lawyer_stories on Instagram. And wherever you are in the world today, enjoy yourselves. Cheers.
Thank you.